Yeah, it is a tough one. Yeah, you know, it's, it's hard for me because I love the whole of my family.
An Indian boy was adopted by an Australian couple who desired to give him the home he needed. For 25 years, he lived as part of their family, until a sudden discovery changed everything. What did he later uncovered about his true identity that shocked the world? Join us as we delve into the story of the boy with a lion heart.
A new home. Saru's new life in Tasmania was far removed from the one he had known in India. He was warmly greeted by his new parents, John and Sue, when he arrived. They offered him a soft toy that felt like a small token of comfort in the midst of so many changes. The car ride through the pristine streets of Tasmania was distinct from the bustling, crowded roads of Calcutta. The houses were spread out, the air was clean, and there were no crowds of people. For the first time in his young life, Saru felt a sense of calm, an unfamiliar but comforting feeling. When they reached their home, Saru's eyes beamed in wonder. The house was nothing like the small, run-down shelter he had known in India. It was spacious and filled with light, the walls adorned with things he had never seen before. There was a television set, something completely new to Saru, and the refrigerator was filled with food. He couldn't comprehend how anyone could have so much. Sue and John told him that this was his new home now, and as they prepared a hearty dinner, Saru could hardly believe his good fortune. It was the kind of meal he could never have dreamed of back in his village. That evening, after dinner, Sue helped him bathe. As Saru stood in the warm water, feeling the sensation of cleanliness for the first time in what felt like forever, Sue reassured him in a soft voice that all the bad things were behind him now. Those gentle words echoed in his mind. It was difficult for Saru to fully grasp the meaning of her words. His life had been filled with so much hardship and uncertainty, and the weight of it all still lingered in his heart. But for the first time, he felt like he might actually be able to put the past behind him. The months that followed were filled with love and care. Saru grew closer to John and Sue, his new parents, who devoted their lives to making sure he felt safe and secure. Despite his initial confusion and uncertainty, Saru adapted. Taking his adoptive parents' surname, Brierley, he slowly began to understand the language, the customs, and the rhythms of his new life. He attended school, made friends, and even started to feel a sense of belonging. But it wasn't long before another change came into their lives. Swamina, who had brought Saru to his new home, introduced the family to another child, Mantosh, a boy from the same orphanage. Mantosh was different from Saru. He was restless, often throwing tantrums and acting out in ways Saru had never done. Sue and John did their best to comfort Mantosh, but the boy's behavior left them feeling helpless. At night, when Sue cried, Saru would quietly approach her, wipe her tears away, and give her a comforting hug. He understood, in his own way, that Sue was struggling with the challenges of raising two very different boys, so he tried to be the child that brought her solace. Time passed, and Saru grew up, transitioning from a boy into a young man. He had a life in Tasmania, a new identity, and a promising future ahead of him. Saru excelled in school and eventually enrolled in a hotel management program in Melbourne. He was now an adult, eager to carve out a future of his own. But Mantosh's struggles continued. He had difficulty adjusting to the structure and expectations of his new life. His behavior became more unstable, and the strain on the family grew. During this period, Saru met a fellow student named Lucy. Lucy was bright, confident, and kind, and Saru was immediately drawn to her. This marked a new chapter for Saru, as they began spending time together, their shared interests slowly building a connection between them. As they walked down the street one evening, Saru felt an undeniable attraction to her, and later, they sat together with a group of friends. It was during this casual gathering that Saru was reminded of his past in a way he had not expected. Seeing the dishes of Indian food, his memories flooded back. Memories of his homeland, of his family, and of the food he used to eat. One dish in particular caught his attention: jalebi, the sweet, sticky treat that had once seemed like an unattainable luxury. As he ate the crispy treat, Saru felt a wave of longing wash over him. Jalebi was something he could only dream of as a child. Now, he could eat as much as he wanted, yet it didn't bring the happiness he expected. It was a bittersweet reminder of everything he had lost. Lucy noticed Saru's distant demeanor and gently asked about it. Reluctantly, he shared his story. He told her about the time he had been lost, about how he had traveled far from his village and ended up in a foreign city. He described the feeling of being alone, lost in a place where he didn't speak the language and where no one seemed to care about his case. He told her that the name of his town didn't even appear on a map, and he wasn't sure whether he had misremembered its name. His story was fragmented, but it was clear that it haunted him. Lucy listened intently, and her empathy was evident. She couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Saru, and she vowed to help him in any way she could. Saru, however, was hesitant. The idea of reopening such painful memories didn't sit well with him. But at the same time, the thought of the family he had left behind clouded his mind. He missed them deeply, and the idea of never knowing what had happened to them was unbearable. From that moment onwards, Saru made a decision. Longing for home. Saru's thoughts became consumed with finding his family. With Lucy's encouragement, he began searching on the internet for clues. He used his knowledge of train schedules and travel times to make educated guesses about where he had ended up all those years ago. He spent countless hours scouring online maps, trying to make sense of the details of his journey, hoping that something would click, that some small piece of the puzzle would reveal itself. In the meantime, Saru and Lucy's relationship deepened. They spent more time together, running along the beach, climbing rocks, and sharing quiet moments. But Saru's mind was never fully at ease. Every time he looked at Lucy, he was reminded of the family he had lost. He felt torn between his love for his new life and the deep, unhealed wound of his past. One day, Lucy decided to visit Sue, Saru's adoptive mother, to talk about Saru's feelings. Sue, who loved Saru with all her heart, was aware of the boy's inner trouble, but she didn't know how to help him heal. Saru, caught in the tug-of-war between his two worlds, still found it difficult to reconcile the boy he had been in India with the man he had become in Australia. It was a delicate situation, and Sue's love for him made it all the more painful. She knew that Saru needed closure, but she feared the emotional toll it might take on him. At a family dinner, Lucy finally brought up the topic with Saru. She encouraged him to tell his parents about his desire to track down his family, but Saru was not ready. The pain of confronting the past was still too raw. He felt torn, unsure whether he could continue living the life he had built, or whether he had to search for the family he had lost. The path ahead was uncertain, but Saru knew that finding closure, whether through reunion or acceptance, was what he needed. It was then that Mantosh's behavior escalated again. He had another episode of uncontrollable aggression, and the tension in the house became unbearable. Saru, watching Sue's distress, could no longer remain silent. He told her that it hurt him to see how much Mantosh was putting her through, and how difficult it was for her to cope with the challenges of raising him. It was a moment of clarity for Saru, one in which he understood the complexities of love and sacrifice. But Lucy, desperate to help Saru, confronted him with the truth again. She told him that he couldn't keep running from his past. Saru, feeling the weight of his unresolved grief, made a painful decision. He told Lucy that she deserved someone who could be fully present, someone who wasn't constantly haunted by the past. With a heavy heart, he left her, thinking it would be better for both of them. This was just one more step in his long journey of self-discovery. Saru searched continuously, even as time seemed to stretch out endlessly. Days blended into weeks, and his search became a consuming obsession. His mind was clouded with memories of his childhood. Despite the intensity of his quest, even looking at the massive size of India with over 1 billion people, Saru didn't give up. The task seemed insurmountable, but Saru held on to a single truth. He would find his family. Even in the quiet moments, he could still hear his mother's voice and feel the warmth of her presence. One evening, while walking by the river, Saru was suddenly overcome with a flood of memories. The smell of the earth, the sound of water trickling by, all reminded him of a life he once knew. Those memories, once so distant, were now vivid, and they fueled his determination even more. Understanding Saru. Pain is crucial, so let's go back to when it all started. Journey of the Lost. The chain of events that led up to that point in Saru's life began in 1986, in a small village in India, where poverty wrapped itself tightly around families like his. Born into poverty in a small village in Madhya Pradesh, Saru was the second child of a struggling single mother. At just 5 years old, Saru lived a life of survival alongside his older brother Gudu and their hard-working mother, who laboured tirelessly to provide for them. Their mother, Kamla, hauled stones to feed her 3 children, but her efforts could barely sustain them. Saru's older brother, Gudu, often took on the role of provider, doing odd jobs to bring home little earnings. The family's existence was a constant struggle, But Saru and Gudu shared a bond forged by survival, a bond that would soon be tested. Their home was humble, their resources scarce, but their bond was a source of warmth amidst their struggles. One day, Saru and Gudu embarked on a small adventure to ease the burden of their hunger. The brothers climbed onto a train to steal coal, knowing they could exchange it for food at the market. The train rattled and clanked as the boys carefully collected the black rocks, their hands stained black with soot. Just as their pockets grew heavy with coal, a security guard spotted them. With hearts pounding, they fled, their bare feet pounding the ground as they darted between corners. Escaping was a relief, and their laughter rang out as they made their way to the market. There, they traded their coal for 2 precious bags of milk. Their smiles widened as they carried the milk home, but they kept their adventure a secret from their mother, knowing she wouldn't approve. Though they didn't reveal the milk's origin, their mother's grateful expression as she served them warmed their hearts. Even in the midst of such joy, the weight of their poverty lingered. Their mother's sparse earnings weren't enough to keep the family sustained, which prompted Gudu to seek work outside the village. One evening, Gudu announced his plans to leave for a week, hoping to earn money to support them. Saru, desperate to stay close to his brother, begged to join him. At first, Gudu resisted, reluctant to take his young sibling along on such an uncertain journey. But Saru's persistence wore him down, and he reluctantly agreed. The brothers boarded a train under the dim glow of the station lights. Saru's excitement radiated as they travelled, his small legs swinging from the wooden bench. When they arrived at their destination, Gudu quickly realised his mistake. Saru, too young and inexperienced, would only hinder his efforts to secure work. Gudu instructed his brother to wait there, pointing to a bench on the platform. Saru nodded obediently and watched his brother disappear into the crowd. Minutes turned to hours, and Saru's excitement transformed into unease. The bustling station grew very quiet as night fell, and Gudu still hadn't returned. Saru's small voice called out for his brother, his cries lost in the noise of the trains. In his search, he wandered onto an empty train car. The exhaustion of waiting overtook him, and he fell asleep. But by the time Saru awoke, the train was in motion towards an unknown destination. Panic set in as he scrambled to the windows, his hands slapping against the glass. The vast expanse of countryside blurred past him, a reminder of how far he was from home. He shouted for help, his voice hoarse and desperate, but the train's relentless journey drowned him out. Days passed, the monotonous rhythm of the wheels pulling him into despair. He survived on scraps and sips of water left by unseen passengers. The train finally came to a halt in Calcutta, over 1,000 miles from his village. As the doors slid open, Saru was met with a sea of unfamiliar faces and an overwhelming wave of noise. The bustling streets were a scene of chaos, but none of the people around him offered help. Lost and disoriented, Saru called for his mother and brother, his cries met with indifference. The language barrier added to his isolation. His Hindi was not understandable by the Bengali-speaking locals. Saru wandered aimlessly, his small frame swallowed by the massive city. In a moment of brief connection, he spotted a girl on the street and followed her to an underpass. Beneath its shadowy arches, Saru discovered a grim reality. Homeless children and teenagers gathered there, their faces etched with hardship. He joined them, his young mind unable to grasp the danger waiting in the shadows. Night fell, and with it came an alarming threat. Some men approached the group with malicious intentions, and Saru's instinct screamed for him to flee. He obeyed, his tiny legs carrying him through the labyrinth of streets. His heart raced as he darted into the darkness, the city's unforgiving gaze watching him. A policeman witnessed the scene but offered no intervention, leaving Saru to navigate the dangers alone. Exhausted, Saru stumbled upon a makeshift temple where people slept under the open sky. The flickering light of oil lamps illuminated the offerings on the floor, and Saru took some of it for himself. The next day, his wandering resumed. The city revealed its harsh reality. Poverty stretched across its streets, with people bathing in the murky waters of the river and scavenging for sustenance. Saru became one of them, sleeping on cardboard and scavenging for food. What he didn't was that things were about to shift. Finding hope. In the midst of this struggle, a glimmer of hope appeared. A woman named Noor noticed Saru and approached him. Her gentle demeanor and ability to speak Hindi offered Saru a moment of opportunity. He confided in her, expressing his desperate desire to return home. Noor, moved by his plight, brought him to her modest home and offered him food and shelter. Saru, eager to contribute, assured her he could work in exchange for her kindness. Noor washed him and spoke of a man named Rama, who she claimed could help him find his family. The next morning Rama arrived, his demeanor kind but with an unsettling undertone. He promised to reunite Saru with his family, but suggested taking him to a safe place first. Saru's instincts sensed something amiss as he overheard Rama's whispered conversation with Noor, suggesting the boy was just what he needed. Saru's unease grew, and despite Noor's attempts to comfort him, he ran away. His escape led him back to the unforgiving streets. Memories of home flashed through his mind, very vivid and painful. He remembered helping his mother carry heavy stones to earn a few coins, their lives a constant struggle against poverty. Now he faced this harsh reality alone. 2 months passed, with Saru surviving on scraps, scavenging at landfills, and then one day he found a spoon. Sitting in front of a cafe with transparent glasses, he tried to mimic a man he saw eating inside. Fate intervened when the man noticed Saru. The man walked up to him and inquired about his origin. Concerned for the boy's safety, the man took him to the police. Saru's attempts to explain where he came from were met with confusion. The name of his village was unknown to them. Frustrated, Saru tried his best to describe his home, but his limited vocabulary and young age made it nearly impossible. The officers took his photograph and filed a report, hoping someone would recognize the child. Days passed with no answers, and Saru's hope of finding his family began to fade. With no leads on where he belonged, the authorities made the difficult decision to send him to an orphanage. The orphanage, a large, crowded building, was a harsh world of its own. When he got there, Saru was greeted by the sight of other children like him, their faces weary and resigned. The conditions were bare, with sparse bedding and basic meals. At breakfast, Saru met a girl named Amita, who whispered to him that the orphanage was not a good place. She told him some children eventually left with new families, but others remained behind in misery. The routine in the orphanage was strict. The children were taught basic reading and writing during the day, a skill Saru struggled to grasp in this new environment. Disobedience was met with swift punishment, as Saru witnessed when a boy named Sandeep was severely punished and later taken away. At night, Saru often lay awake, haunted by the memory of his family and the fear of what the future might hold. One morning, Saru was called to meet Mrs. Sood, a kind but firm woman who worked tirelessly to help children like him. She explained to Saru that his photograph had been circulated in the newspapers, but no one had come forward to claim him. The realization that his family might never find him hit him hard. But Mrs. Sood had another plan. She told him about a couple from Australia who were eager to adopt him. Their names were John and Sue, and they lived in Tasmania, far away from the streets of Calcutta. At first, Saru was hesitant, but soon he began to warm to the idea. Mrs. Sood showed him pictures of John and Sue, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the bleakness of the orphanage. Amita encouraged him, saying Australia was a wonderful place, far better than where they were now. Mrs. Sood also started preparing Saru and other children for life with their new families, teaching them table manners and how to use cutlery, which are skills none of them had needed before. When the day of his departure arrived, Saru was both nervous and excited. He was escorted by a woman named Swamina, and he boarded a plane for the first time. He clutched the photograph of John and Sue tightly, wondering what awaited him in this strange new land. As the plane ascended into the sky, Saru stared out the window. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. His journey, though far from over, had taken a different turn. Finding answers. Fast forward to when he had grown and was in search of his past life. John, his adoptive father, had noticed the toll the search was taking on Saru. His concern for his son grew as the weeks wore on. Saru had become distant, consumed by his memories and the hope of finding his long-lost family. One evening, John sat down with him, voicing his worry. He spoke not only about Saru, but also about Mantosh, the younger boy they had adopted, who had also been struggling. Mantosh, unlike Saru, had a restless and unpredictable nature, and his outbursts had been a constant source of stress. But it was Saru's sadness that concerned John the most. During a routine visit to the mall, Saru unexpectedly ran into Lucy, his former girlfriend. The encounter was awkward, filled with unspoken tension. The weight of their past hung heavy between them, and Saru could see the hurt in her eyes. Their breakup had been messy, and the time apart had only added to their emotional distance. They went to one of their best spots where Saru finally allowed himself to be vulnerable. For the first time in a long while, he spoke openly, sharing his pain and frustration. He admitted to Lucy that the search for his family was consuming him, but he also expressed how much he missed her and how lost he felt. Lucy listened intently because she still cared for Saru despite their breakup. She understood the depth of his suffering. Saru had never truly let go of his past, and Lucy recognized that he needed closure. She suggested that he share his search with his adoptive mother, who had always been a constant source of love and support. Saru hesitated, but Lucy's words resonated within him. He knew she was right. The weight of his past had become too heavy to bear alone. In the days that followed, Saru continued to reflect on his search, often recalling the hardships he endured as a child. He remembered scavenging for food on the streets, the loneliness and despair that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It was a stark contrast to the life he now led, filled with the comforts of his adoptive family. But those comforts did little to ease the ache in his heart. Saru longed for his mother, his family, the life he had lost. When Saru finally mustered the courage to speak to Sue, his adoptive mother, he discovered something unexpected. Sue, who had always been a nurturing presence in his life, revealed that she and John had never viewed their decision to adopt Saru and Mantosh as a fallback. They had chosen to adopt because they had a deep, genuine desire to provide a loving home to children who needed it, even if they were capable of conceiving theirs. The words left Saru stunned, and for a moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. His parents had given him everything, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow betrayed them by obsessing over his past. That night, Saru went to see Mantosh, hoping to connect with his adopted brother. But Mantosh, who had been struggling with his own demons, was nowhere near the person Saru had hoped he would be. Mantosh's behavior had worsened, and he had become more erratic, which caused him to find comfort in alcohol. Saru found him sleeping, unaware of his brother's spiraling descent. It was a painful reminder that Saru's own path to healing would never be straight. He was lost in his thoughts, unsure of how to help his brother, or how to resolve the turmoil in his own heart. In a moment of clarity, Saru realized that the only way forward was to return to the search that had once consumed him. And so, he turned back to the Google Maps application, which had become his lifeline. Saru scrolled through the map, zooming in on every inch of India. The hours passed as he painstakingly searched, trying to trace his family's footsteps, and then in an instant it happened. Saru recognized a place on the map, a familiar landmark, a road he had once known. His heart skipped a beat. It was his childhood home, or what had been his childhood home. He immediately realized that he had been mispronouncing the name of his hometown for years. It wasn't Ganesh Tali, as he had remembered. It was Ganesh Talai. The realization hit him like a wave, and tears streamed down his face. It was as if all the puzzle pieces had finally clicked into place. Saru had found his home. After all these years, after all the heartbreak and despair, he had finally found the answers he had been searching for. The next morning, Saru rushed to Lucy, bursting with excitement. He had found his family. He had found his home. Lucy, who had seen Saru at his lowest, was overjoyed for him. She promised to wait for him, to stand by his side as he embarked on the next chapter of his journey. He was excited to find out what had happened all those years he left home, so he set out on a journey. Home at last. With newfound determination, Saru told his adoptive parents about the breakthrough. Sue and John, who had supported him through every trial and tribulation, were very happy for him. They knew that this moment had been years in the making. Saru was about to take the most significant step in his life, a return to India, to the place where everything had started. Saru boarded a flight to India, feeling a rush of emotions. The year was 2012, and as the plane descended into his homeland, memories flooded his mind. When he arrived, he checked into a motel before setting out to visit the city where he had once lived. It felt unreal, as if he were walking through a dream. The streets looked different, yet everything felt strangely familiar. He wandered through the city, looking for any sign of the life he had once known. Finally, after hours of searching, Saru arrived at the site where his family's house had stood. But to his shock, it was no longer there. In its place was a goat shed, a harsh reminder of the passage of time. Saru's heart sank. He felt as though he had lost everything again, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He showed a local man a photo of himself as a child, explaining the situation, hoping against hope that someone would recognize him. The man, understanding Saru's desperation, motioned for him to follow. Saru's heart raced as they walked through the narrow streets. Then, as if by some miracle, Saru saw her, his mother, the woman who had never stopped believing that her son would return. Saru's heart leapt in his chest. It had been 25 years, but she recognized him immediately. The floodgates opened, and Saru was overcome with emotion. The reunion was raw, pure, and beautiful. They embraced, not needing words to convey the depth of their love. But there was no time to dwell on the past. Saru's mind quickly turned to his brother Gudu. He asked his mother where he was, but the answer was heartbreaking. Gudu had passed on years ago. Saru's grief engulfed him as he wept for the brother he had lost. But in that moment, as the tears flowed, he realized that his family was whole again, even if one piece was missing. The reunion was a public spectacle, and soon a small crowd had gathered, applauding the emotional moment. Shakila, Saru's sister who was all grown up, joined them, completing the circle. Saru's heart was heavy, knowing that Gudu would never return, but the sight of his mother and sister standing beside him filled him with peace. As Saru left the town, he sent a voicemail to Sue and John, telling them that he had found the answers he had been searching for. The family could now rest easy, knowing that their son had found peace. But Saru's heart would always ache for the brother he lost. As Saru continued to reflect on the events that had brought him to this moment, he learned that his brother Gudu had perished the night Saru had fallen asleep on the train. His mother, Kamla, had never given up hope. She had always believed that Saru would return, and now, after all these years, she had her son back. Saru's true name, the one he had mispronounced for so many years, was Saru, which meant lion. And in that moment, Saru truly became the lion he was meant to be. Saru's story was not just one of loss, but also one of healing, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.